All right. Good morning,
Live?
everyone. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. We're here today with our second set of community hours for Microsoft Identity. So here with Christos, and we've got a guest today, and we're going to kick off with some news, and then we'll get into what some new stuff that we're all working on. So, Christos, take it
Absolutely.
away.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen and then we're good to kick it off. Nice to have everyone here. But before I share my screen, what a day yesterday with Twitter, right? What
Yeah.
happened there?
Yeah, it was pretty
It
wild.
was insane, right?
Yeah.
We had this massive hack. All the verified accounts were taken over, or some of them, and people started sending Bitcoin to get them back. And if you haven't heard about social engineering or what it can do to your company, then this is the time now to get educated, because it just goes to prove that social engineering can really do some damage on your companies. Thankfully, there is addressing the issue, so they're removing or reducing admin access internally, so people that could potentially become targets of social engineering won't have access to important data. So uh, the public announcement of the day. Look at social engineering, educate yourselves, and make sure you don't become a victim of that.
Yeah, it was like
Security is
we had it was like Bill Gates and Elon Musk and a bunch of folks were tweeting out Bitcoin scams, which I mean, I don't know. I guess on some level, it's sort of like something for nothing, and it's Bitcoin. Like that would seem like it would flag you twice. But I mean,
yeah.
happens to the best of us, right?
Give me money?
Sorry,
No.
no, I still have 0 Bitcoin. So
But did you take part in the extravaganza yesterday? That's the question. If you didn't take part, then you won't have anything, right? Joke aside, let's come back to identity and some interesting stuff here. I'm going to cover some of the community and interesting news from last week. I would like to start with the new sample that we put out there. It's called the Event Viewer Blazor app. So it's actually on GitHub. You can see the link. We'll share the links later as well. But what this app does is allows you to look at your event grid messages and investigate and look what's happening. It also has Azure AD authentication, so you can securely access that. It also adds Azure Key Vault, and it's all built with Blazor, so it's fantastic. You can run it anywhere and it works and points to your event grid. It's a fantastic app. It uses SignalR. It's a bunch of technology, so it's pretty cutting edge. Even if you don't want to run it, you can go and look at the architecture and see how it was put together. Next one, we have a video from our build. I wanted to go back to our build videos because our team did a lot of work there to make sure that we communicate what we're doing and what's happening. For this expert QA question with Jean-Marc Pierre, we are going through our authentication libraries. There's a QA there, so make sure to look at the video and see what's coming. We've covered Microsoft to Ident.web quite a few times on our show, and we'll be continuing to cover that as the library establishes itself and goes into GA and .NET 5. But if you want to catch up on how it works and why it works in certain ways, then our experts, our PMs are on that talk to talk about it. Next one, I caught this nice blog post by Brian Jacket. He goes into explaining that there are some edge cases that you may not catch, and he was working with one of our customers on Microsoft Graph. And it turns out that when you call Microsoft Graph endpoint with delegated implicit authentication, you don't get the Azure AD roles out of the box by default. So you need to do a little bit of work there. Great blog post. It goes into explaining why and how to work around it, which is fantastic. So have a look at this blog post. Next one, I wanted to give a shout out to Matthias Extra. He used to be in our team. He's now working on external identities. But before he left, he did an amazing job in talking about identity for developers. And there's a very nice series on YouTube that explain how to protect APIs, what are permissions and consents and what have you. So a lovely series by Matthias. Make sure to check it out if you want to get a quick understanding of how our platform works beyond the stuff that we do every week. Conference-wise, we have two very interesting conferences. We have the Create Frontend, which is running next week on July 29th. some really exciting speakers and some really exciting content here. So this is run by Microsoft. It's virtual. Anybody can join. So make sure to add this to your calendar. The other one is .NET Conf, the micro series, if you want to call it, because we have the big .NET conference that runs once a year, but at the beginning of 2021, we decided to do smaller, more focused events, and this one is actually focused on microservices. So we have a lot of speakers from the community, like Julie Lerman, but we also have our CDAs, we have our PMs. They come in and talk about a subject. This time we're focused on microservices. So make sure to tune in. The show is actually in 14 days on July 30th. Again, it's free, it's online, you don't have to leave your couch to participate, and they have really good engagements, they have giveaways and what have you, so make sure to check it out. And that's me with the community news of the week.
Yeah, we'll make sure all these links get in the chat and show notes too, so that you can get out there and not have to rewind and try to OCR the video stream. So, okay, cool. So this week we've got a friend of the show, Shannon Kuehn, who is a cloud ops advocate at Microsoft, and she and I used to work together, and so we thought it'd be great to have her come on and talk about some of the real world work that she's been doing for her customers that doesn't necessarily always fit into the sample mold or into the demo mold, and helping people maintain access to their existing infrastructure and reuse their existing infrastructure and sort of accelerate the work that they're doing with our templates. So, Shannon, good morning. From a dungeon somewhere, I'm not entirely sure where.
Defense against the Dark Arts. Yeah, all the Harry Potter fans out there, I suppose, right? And we're dealing with Defense Against the Dark Arts, right? Like, this is some legacy auth that people don't, it's not for the faint of heart, right? I think we can always appreciate that there's these folks out there that have built out these entire infrastructures and are a little hesitant to take on new ways of thinking about authentication, right? I think, John, you and I, we've worked on a lot of different customers where we're thinking they're totally ready for Azure Active Directory, and they're totally not. So, it's just the nature of the beast, right? So you have to kind of meet your customers where they are, and it's a matter of having that deeper conversation. So I work on the cloud advocate team. My specific sub-team in methods and practices is the enterprise platforms and tools team. So I focus on trying to get out there and help our program group spread the news of Azure solution. That's our latest and greatest big mass enterprise solution that we can now take your entire environment as is and shove it in Azure, and then your upskilling becomes a little bit less of a dire need, right? You don't have to focus on it out the gate. You can take that on at a time that makes more sense versus having to learn IaaS, learn Azure Active Directory, learn Azure Security Center, Azure Monitor, right? So we're taking the management plane and we're moving it into to Azure. So that's kind of what I focus on, and as a result, something I noticed we didn't have in our Quick Starts repo. So our Quick Starts repo is awesome for ARM templates, right? If you are brand new, you've never had an opportunity to go in and take a look at it, it's a really great repo to understand how to make use of ARM templates. My background's very infrastructure focused, but I joke a lot now that I'm kind of this weird infrastructure dev. I somewhere sit in the middle now. And, I noticed there was nothing out there focusing on replica domain controllers. So when I think about my customers and the customers I've worked with who are trying to just take on Azure, they're not spinning up brand new domain controllers in Azure. They're doing some sort of hybrid identity, extending that infrastructure on-prem into Azure. And there was no easy to follow guide out there. So this is also a public announcement. I probably need to put it out there, right? So that'll be in the next sort of month here or so. There's a lot of interesting things I have to follow in order to get it in that repo. So I just got kind of pointed to all of that, and then source control and me, we kind of get along. So I think I've got a good handle on that. JP, I'll have to reach out if I run into any problems doing a pull request. So this is how you do it, folks. If you're an infrastructure person, you find a developer who appreciates you, and you just say, hey, talk to me like I'm 6 years old. Help me out here. So it's less scary, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think I think that From my background working with customers, and of course you and I worked together for a long time with a lot of different customers. We'd love for everybody to go cloud first, cloud all the time, and just Control A, Control V, and paste everything into the cloud as quickly as possible. But of course, it's not a reality. And I think, especially what we see is when we've got especially with large enterprises, there's so much infrastructure that's just sort of grown over the years, and so many different things that need to be delivered that trying to figure out what to move first or figuring out what to move at all can be a huge mountain to have to climb, right? And identity ends up being one of the biggest components of the whole thing. Is, I'm on-prem, I've got AD, or I've got some other directory, and we're using LDAP, or we're using Kerberos to authenticate users to these apps, or to get access to SQL or file servers or whatever. And when you look at Azure, it's kind of a story of two clouds, right? We've got the infrastructure side, and it's very similar to what you have on-prem, but not entirely. And then there's the whole PaaS side, and of course PaaS is where we see the most sort of bang for your buck. And as we move customers or help them progress through those buckets and move from on-prem to some in IaaS to maybe this is a cool PaaS solution, or this has a lot of the hallmarks of a great PaaS solution. Identity's there with them the whole way, right? You can't get to the Azure portal. You can't connect to storage and do everything you need to do to start migrating data and apps without a comprehensive identity strategy up front. And so what have you seen in our quick starts, like the ones that we have now and the ARM templates we have now?
Let's see. So let's see, let me share my screen here. This might be a good opportunity to showcase what we're working on, or at least I'm not even sure what team owns this. That's the best part. I probably should figure this out, right? I think this is the right screen. Let me know. Oh yeah, it is. Okay, cool. You get like 18 different options, and it's like screen 1, screen 2, and I've got GitHub open on 2 screens, so I'm like, I hope I picked the right screen. So it's a great repository, right? There's 101 level templates. There's 201 level templates. There's a lot of 101s. Hang on.
You know what? We have loved being able to select one of the templates and download it. It's usually I found the one I need. Oh, now I need to fork the whole repo and get it down.
Yeah. I read like inklings that people are thinking about breaking some of this up, and I think it might move at some point or become a little bit like these are the 101 templates, these are the 201 templates, these are the 301 templates. So I think down here, it's Active Directory, new domain. This is an HA script or a series of templates, right? So you've got your deploy template, your parameters template, you've got DSC, you've also got nested templates. I can't tell you how many customers I'll show this to, and they almost have an anxiety attack because we're talking about taking on code. We're talking about taking on nested templates, which that's not easy, right? And then we're talking about taking on DSC, which depending upon how savvy those infrastructure folks are, they may or may not even know about DSC. Mm-hmm. So this is one of them, and this is an availability zone. Right?
Well, we might have people that don't know what DSC is. So should we spend 2 quick minutes to just explain what DSC is?
Sure, yeah. So DSC stands for Desired State Configuration, and it's really one of those things that lends itself well to Windows configuration. So it's idempotent idempotent declarative parameters or declarative set of instructions, so your server knows what it's supposed to do, right? Add a specific role, go through the process of initializing a disk, and I'll walk through what I've done with my replica domain controller ARM templates. So what it does is it'll go through, it will domain join that VM, it will initialize the data disk, it will also install the Active Directory role and the DNS role. It will then take its own after it goes through a series of reboots, it'll pick up where it left off and continue to kind of promote that domain controller, which is a whole process in and of itself, right? I think every administrator out there has at one point in time installed Active Directory. It's a very straightforward installation, but gosh, wouldn't it be nicer if you could speed it up and have it automated? So that's one of the ways in which it can help. But I've seen DSC be used for SharePoint configuration, website configuration. If you've got a web app that sits in IIS, that's a fantastic way to think about it. Maybe there's a specific way you want to enable all of these VMs to have the same configuration. That's where DSC really comes in. So it helps you prevent configuration drift. So a lot of infrastructure folks, they kind of get to the point where they didn't even really embrace this, and it's kind of a sad reality. And what we see out there too is a lot of the actual modules are still experimental. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, we should like try and make this be a little less experimental, because I still feel like there's validity here, especially once you understand how it works, right? It's not like, I think anybody could read through this and understand what the DSC script is doing, right? It's just literally saying, if this is not present, install it, then go through this series of configuration tasks. And, the reboot piece is built into the script itself. And it's pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of heartache involved too, because you have to kind of troubleshoot some of it as well, right? If it doesn't want to work right, you have to go in and remove the DSC extension, and then go read the logs on the VM that got deployed in Azure and figure out what exactly went wrong. So it's not a straightforward process. I hope at some point it becomes a little bit more straightforward, because I think everybody wants to get to that point, right? Cloud is an awesome reality. You don't want to have to worry about having to go and individually configure servers. It'd be awesome just to have a fleet of servers that have a specific configuration pattern.
Right.
Now,
well, and
go on, JP. I'll ask my question after.
Well, I mean, so that's the promise of cloud, right? Is elasticity and
right.
Instances on demand and VMs on demand, and you don't need to build out that infrastructure up front. But if you've got hundreds or thousands of servers that are always running, and you don't even necessarily know what they all are, then you kind of lose a lot of that value, and that's where the automation comes in. I mean,
right.
Years ago, I remember working with a customer, and they told me that every 3 years they build out their Hyper-V infrastructure because they need additional capacity, and they have a 4-month process to get a VM, right? So you have to fill out a bunch of forms, and it goes to the networking team, to the SAN team, to all these different people. Brutal. And so after 4 months, you get your dev box, but for all of that sort of process and routine and ceremony to get a VM, when it was time for that VM to go, nobody knew whose it was, and nobody knew when it should leave, right? So we got this huge provisioning and no deprovisioning. And so while we were sitting there, and granted this was a few years ago, so it wasn't super recent, but while we were sitting there, the employee we were working with, he opened up his laptop and he RDP'd into a Windows 2000 Advanced Server VM that he was given when he first started there 9 years prior. That his project had been over for 8.5 years, and but he said, well, nobody knows who owns it, and the process that we have to go through is so onerous to get a VM that nobody ever wants to turn them off or delete them, because it's like, well, if I need to do some work, I got to get this thing going again, and I think that's a lot of that is almost attributable to sort of a lack of automation, right? A lack of looking at our infrastructure as a repeatable, code-based process rather than a bunch of pets, right? The server versus pets, or the cattle versus pets metaphor that's been floating around forever. So, question for you then, Shannon.
Sure.
How many times have you worked with a customer or known of a customer, especially big enterprise customer, who needs a net new Active Directory forest and domain for a thing that they're building?
Zero.
That's a trick question.
Well, no, I take that back. I did have a customer that decided to build out a cloud island, and then they had some sort of resource forest trust. So what happened in Azure was the Azure forest. It trusted production on-prem, but production didn't trust it. That was the only customer. Every other customer has some sort of hybrid extension. Okay. Because it's, you poke at your domain controllers long enough, something will probably break, right? And you just want to kind of set it up and almost kind of forget it, right? You want to make sure it's up and functional and can be seen across the wire. So I had that one customer, and that was it. Out of my, I don't even know, am I up to 100? I probably get close to the hundreds now in terms of customers I've helped.
And backtracking a little bit, we did talk about DSC and Windows, but it's very important to also clarify that we support DSC on Linux, considering how many people are running Linux on Azure these days. It's very important for people to know that DSC PowerShell 7 actually supports desired state configuration for Linux machines as well. And we have great documentation. So just because we mentioned Windows before doesn't mean that we are forgetting the other 52% of Linux workloads.
That's true. Good call out. I always think of it as something where PowerShell and Windows just go hand in hand because of all that .NET history. But it's one of those things where, and I think a lot of it too is my big customers, if they've got a massive Linux presence, they've got Chef or Ansible or something in the mix that also and that can plug into DSC as well, right? So the sky is the limit. There's a lot of different tools here that you can lean on from the way of being able to specify what you want from a configuration perspective. So, but yeah, I tend to think less about DSC and Linux, even though that's always been a thing, because of the fact that MOF is an open format. So it's one of those things where it's just like I even forget about certain things because usually those customers have Chef, Ansible, Puppet, whatever, right? Salt. So.
Yeah. Okay. Dumb question. What is MOF? Was that MOF?
Yes. Is that a good thing?
It's it's the file that gets compiled for DSC to run.
I see.
I
All right.
believe. Now, if I have that wrong, Matt Canty will have to, make fun of me on Twitter because he's the one I go to because I am like, how does this work? And he's always the one that's like, hang on, let me help you out here. So I believe that's the actual file that gets compiled by DSC and helps the server know what it needs to do, and it's an open format.
Okay,
I believe.
Cool. So I end up
Now,
with.
if I have that wrong, my apologies. I'm going off my brain versus Google. Or Bing.
So I end up with this template, right, with my ARM template for Azure, and I also end up with like this MOF file, or I don't know if that's, maybe it's format, right? So I end up with this file, with a MOF file and an ARM template, and those two together are what both deploys my infrastructure and configures my infrastructure, right?
Well, so let me go over here to my GitHub repo, and this is a good kind of plug for my GitHub repo. Again, this will make its way to our quick starts. I recently figured out all of the rules I think I've got to make sure I match in order for this to be accepted. So the MOF file itself is what shows up on the VM. So that's what. So the way I understand DSC is that every single node in Azure is a node that can be used from it's got a local configuration manager on it. So LCM's kind of the shortened abbreviation. That's what can interpret those MOF files. Those MOF files, by way of that extension getting plugged through on the VM, that's what generates the MOF file. And the MOF file never shows up in the repo here. The repo itself is literally, it's a DSC zip that you download. And you download it from a storage container, right? In my example, I have it linked here, but you could always have that show up in Azure Storage. You could always have it be passed with a SAS token, right? So there's ways of thinking about securing that deployment. But inside here, it's literally a PowerShell script. So let me do this here. So let me.
So this PowerShell file could include sensitive information that we don't want to other people to get access to, right?
Well, correct. So there's ways of making that secure. So this is essentially what gets plugged through, and this is the DSC piece as it stands, right? So you declare a handful of parameters, and these are ways to pass these creds in from a safe perspective. I'll showcase how you do that inside the template as well, because if you plug it in and it's not secure, it'll be passed as clear text, and I don't think anybody wants that anymore. I mean, unless you really want to get another hack, right? So the way this worked is it reads like a regular PowerShell script, but notice it's a little bit different here, right? So I'm declaring that this node is going to be like the local host. I take a look at the local configuration manager, and remember, every single VM in Azure has this, right? It's a node that can accept a DSC configuration. From there, it basically says, actually after reboot, you continue the configuration. So that's why DSC is probably a better reality to lean on than a custom script extension. So ever so slightly different, right? It's another way to think about automating some of the configuration that has to happen. But if you have a situation where Active Directory would require a reboot and then kind of pick up where it left off, you'd have to have probably DSC. I haven't seen a custom script extension work as well as DSC does in that reality.
Well, sure, yeah, because you've got to manage state yourself in your own script, right? And that would be, and this is going to manage the state for you and apply the configuration that is not yet applied, right? Like this is trying to get you back to a known good state rather than you figuring that out in your script of what state am I in, and then let me go do the work to remediate that, right?
Correct. And then note here too, so all these modules get imported as by way of the script. So what I have done is, I don't know if anybody knows about this. It's like a nice little sort of cheat, so to speak. All of the engineering in Visual Studio is a fantastic way for somebody who's more of an ops person to get comfortable with some of what you have to do related to building out a VM or building out some sort of highly nestable or nested templates, right? Things of that sort. So when you right click and you go to deploy and you click on new here, I'll walk through some of this. Hopefully this is fast. It probably won't be because it never does when you actually want it to show up fast.
I mean, it's okay.
You can do pre-recorded live.
Yeah, right.
Live, right?
Live. This is where like the Jeopardy theme song comes on, right?
Allow me to play for you a YouTube video of me doing this half an hour ago.
Yeah, right. And it actually loaded. Well, so maybe what I can do here is just describe what happens. So you specify the subscription, the resource group. You can always edit your parameters. So if you've got parameters specified, you can always change these before you deploy, which I think is awesome. And then what it does is behind the scenes, it'll save it with the latest parameters that you've adjusted, and you don't have to go into your parameters file if you don't need to, right? So that's kind of a cool reality. The artifact storage account, what it does is it will take everything that lives in this folder and it will zip it up for you. And that's how you get all of the right manifests that it's looking for when it's downloading that information from blob storage or from a GitHub account or something of that sort, right? So I like Visual Studio to kind of walk through the whole notion of how to make some of this work. And it's totally not. Oh, there we go. It loaded. So there we go.
So out of curiosity, do we not have something equivalent within VS Code? Because I know that
you do. You just so the last I checked, I think you have to take some of this. So here, I'll back out of here. You have to take some of this script, and you can do the same thing, but they don't have the same engineering. And I know that they're trying to work on that because this has been a huge, like, so when you have these conversations with customers where the anxiety is high and they think their job is being eliminated, it's like, no. If anything, it's going to go crazier and you need to be prepared, right?
Yeah.
So I think they've seen the fact that these ops folks lean on Visual Studio Community or Enterprise if they've got it in their environment because of the way that it hooks into certain things. So like, even if you wanted to create something brand new, the quick start repos show up, right, inside of Visual Studio, whereas you have to do a little bit of copying and pasting, which is fine inside Visual Studio. So I think Visual Studio can be done the same way. And I was joking with I'll mention Matt Canty again. Hi, Matt Canty. When I was joking with Matt, I said I should at some point take this and build some sort of corresponding blog post that talks about how to set this up, because I think there's a lot of folks that might not be on a Windows machine, right? So Visual Studio on a Mac is not the same Visual Studio that it is on a Windows machine, right? Or they're on Linux, or they just like Visual Studio Code better, right?
Yep.
So maybe that becomes a future thing to think about, right? But yeah, so all that does is it kind of leans on this specific script here, and it's a great script to lean on. Even if you build out a brand new project in Visual Studio and you say that it's an Azure Resource Manager or Azure it's a resource group deployment, you get this by default. So all of this pre-populated stuff really helps if folks are anxious about what comes next, right? Like, what does my future look like? And you see down here, it's looking for like the artifact path, right? So this is some of the stuff I'd have to experiment with, but I know it can be done because I know that, I know when I was working with Matt previously, he had done some of this, and he's literally like, once you get to that point though, you're going to want to go back to Visual Studio the next time that you need to do something like it's like the nested templates and the DSC stuff. The engineering inside Visual Studio is a little bit easier to embrace. It's not that you can't do it in Visual Studio Code.
Okay. And can you actually debug this? Like if you were getting stuck or if you're getting errors, is there an option to debug, or do you just zip it and then off you go and fingers crossed it's working?
So the debugging, so let's say for instance, you plug this in as is and you get all kinds of errors. The debugging pieces show up on the server itself.
Right.
So there are log files that get generated on each of the LCM nodes that you're trying to configure, and that's where you'll figure out certain things aren't being passed correctly. So this is funny. It's a funny little aside story. I was passing my creds in as a string. Novice move. Didn't even realize I was doing that. And so Matt and I were like, well, why won't this work? And he's like, and so we kept reading all of these error messages in the log stating that I didn't have my username and my password correct. And I'm like, I have typed it in like 10 bajillion times. I swear to you, it's the right username and password. And then he's like, well, let's go look at your script. And he's like, well, you're not passing it in as like a safe credential. You're passing it in as a string. And I'm like, Oh god. So I was like, why? So he thought that was funny. But there's things like that, right? So there's ways in which you're struggling. Everything should be passed correctly, but you're still getting errors on the server, and so it's a matter of just knowing where to go. And then I think also too, John, what I should do is I should share all the blog posts that I built out for the tech community blogs, because I talk about some of that, right? Talk about some of the ways to go into these files and dig through it. I don't have any of these domain controllers up right now, otherwise I'd RDP into it as well. So, the template itself is pretty straightforward, right? There's I lean on a prefix versus declaring each individual VM. So I learned some cool realities of doing copy index, down here for the actual resource itself. And I don't know if you can see this very well. I do have the dark mode on, but this is kind of a cool little bit that I learned throughout the process of struggling through this. I originally had 2 DCs in an availability set. Well, now I have 1 DC resource, but it's leaning on, the combination of pad left and copy index. And it's adding that 1, that 2, based upon how many that I set up, right?
Oh, cool.
So so that was kind of a cool one. I was like, wow, I have struggled so much with copy index and pad left, and it was I felt like it was like a achievement unlocked, right? Like I had beat the game, right? I didn't beat the game. There's still lots to learn, but it was kind of a cool reality. And so I talk about that in some of the blog posts I had done for the IT ops community. So
this will give you, if you need, if you want 7 replicas or 25 replicas, well, however many you want, you're not defining each one of those independently. You're defining that template one time, or that VM one time, and saying, hey, make me however many copies of it that I want, and then giving them each unique names with a number or some sort of random value after them, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I have a parameter called resource count. I have done the default value. You could always change this. You could have it be, 100. I mean, why would you want 100 DCs? But you could have it, right? And it would go through the whole process of configuring all 100, and then you'd have a really ridiculously big environment. But you could do that, right? And that's kind of cool.
No, that is
hey, Shannon, I've got all dice. Can we zoom in a little bit?
Oh, maybe? Yes. Let's see. Hang on.
Down at the bottom of the code window, there's a nice percentage there. Allows you. There you go. Thank you. My old guys now can see. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I always forget too that. So I actually am using a lower resolution screen, but I always forget that everybody's got such high resolution screens these days. So, but yeah, so I declare resource count, right? And then when you come down here to the DC itself, so you give the copy a name. You say VM loop, right? And then the same thing with the nick here. So you give the name, you give it nick loop, right? And then you're concatenating the nickname, you're padding it left, you're using the copy index feature. And then the cool thing is when you put depends on, so for the DCs itself, the nicks need to be there, right? Because if you create a VM without a nick, it'll totally fail, and you're like, what the hell's going on? And I mean, talk about ways of struggling through this, because the ways of old were you build out a template from VMware or something, right? And the nick's all built into that template. You don't have to think about compartmentalizing the fact that my VM now needs disks, a nick, maybe it needs a public IP, right? There's a lot of different things you can think about now, and it's all very much so a la carte, right? So I thought this was cool. Like when you want to make sure that this doesn't start until this completes, it's literally as simple as depends on nick loop, and the way that this script reads it, it'll go through and it'll say, okay, so this has to go first. This doesn't depend on anything, so that comes first. Then this depends on the nick loop, and then the availability set also depends on the nick loop. So you can actually place the availability set, or you can stand it up once those nicks, because that's really all it relies upon, right? So that was kind of a cool little bit there to realize how all that gets plugged through. And then this is the DSC extension itself, right? So very similar at the top here. I'm doing the concatenation. I'm doing the pad left. And I'm doing pad left twice, because when you actually see it, so I don't know if you've ever, well, I'm assuming both of you have deployed lots of ARM templates, but when you deploy it this way, you get a lot of cool verbose logging, which is kind of neat. But when you're watching it, wouldn't it also be nice to know exactly what you're seeing? So this extra pad left kind of tells you that it's applying it to the first DC, and then it tells you it's applying it to the second DC. So you can kind of see that in the logging. And I didn't have enough time to get something stood up. So my sincere apologies, John.
That's okay. So So this ARM template. This is what's going to handle getting our VMs out there, and then the DSC extension itself is the thing that's actually going to go and configure AD and install the roles and
Correct.
What about when it's time to start joining it up to our existing domain that's on prem? Because I'm assuming there's some networking stuff, like we need to be connected on prem somehow, right?
Sure.
With VPN or
Yeah.
root or something. And perfect. You've got a
So
diagram. Even better.
So inside this, I took some of our awesome Visio stencils, which I think are always great. But I mean, I struggle with Visio because it takes forever for me to get it to look nice, right? If only people just cared about knowing what was there and all the nice, Anyway, so I decided to showcase the things that you need here. So I call out the prereqs, right? I call out there needs to be a site-to-site VPN or express route with private peering. The DNS servers on the Azure VNet need to be able to see the on-prem domain controllers. I don't think it really cares what DNS server is allocated there, right? Typically, if you're very big on the Windows front, maybe it's one of those things where, you lean on a DC that's got the DNS role installed. And then, I also talk about Key Vault. So one of the ways in which this template works here, and I can open this back up. Oops, wrong one.
I love Key Vault with ARM templates. It's absolutely stunning.
It is great.
If you're using Azure DevOps, then it ties everything so nicely with Active Directory as service principles. I am surprised that people are not using it every single day. So that's how it's done.
Yeah. So inside of an ARM template without DevOps, right, you would just call it out here as a parameter. So it needs this very long ID, and it doesn't work if you put it in the actual template itself, because I had many failed efforts trying to do it that way, right, over the years. So the way to do it is to create the key vault, right, give it a secret name, and so you're actually, at the time of deployment, it'll go to this specific subscription, this resource group, it'll take a look at everything as it stands, and it will pull the secret name and plug it into the deployment without you having to have anything in clear text. So that's one of the things I mentioned as a prereq as well, right? So
the people and the people who have access perhaps to know those secrets, the people who are putting those secrets into Key Vault aren't even necessarily the same people doing the deployments, or if they're totally automated deployments, they're coming from service principles anyway. So now we have a way that, I'm thinking about it from, if I'm a dev, for example, I need to go stand up something new, or I need to do a deployment. It's a great way to sort of separate those concerns so that you're not sharing domain credentials, because of course, an existing domain, that's domain admin credentials are pretty dangerous to go to just share as strings with somebody somewhere.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So having it in Key Vault gives you a nice separation between who puts them in and who can read them, right?
Yep, exactly.
And auditing and what have you, so admins can see who used them the last time, and you can roll them automatically, and it will be so easy. People should be using Key Vault with ARM templates. It's a fairly straightforward process. I would love to see that more widely adopted.
Yeah, I think the hardest part for me, though, again, when I first was taking on ARM templates, I didn't really have a parameters file, so I put a lot of things in here.
Right.
And it likes to fall on its face if you put it here. So that was kind of the thing I determined, was maybe I should actually use those parameter files that you see in the GitHub repo. Maybe there's a reason why they're there. Aha, that's the reason. Okay.
And with parameters files, you can have multiple parameter files. You can have one for dev, one for QA, and one for production, all pointing to different key vaults and what have you. So again, by just changing the parameters files, you don't have to change your main ARM template, and everything becomes so separated and secure, and I love it.
Well, it's so much easier to share too, right? Like you can share on GitHub, and it's fine on GitHub because there are literally no secrets in there, and you can share it internally. And if you've got other teams who benefit, who maybe don't fall under your, necessarily in your org or in your team, and you want to, share the love of what you built, then there's no risk there that you're going to leak a secret to them. And of course, we see that all the time, right? We see secrets getting leaked on GitHub or even internal places.
Twitter? Well, they just got hacked. Really, let's be honest. I
know it's gotta be a rough day today.
It's not a laughing matter, but yeah,
I'm sure. But yeah, so that was always
a bunch of Bitcoin, right? So.
But yeah, so going back to the whole topic here, just note that and then my examples on GitHub. Let's see, hang on. Yeah, my examples on GitHub, I just have a random GUID because that was the hard thing, right? You go to the quick starts repo and everything's gen name, and you're like, well, how in the heck do I formulate this in a way where it's not going to trip over itself? So I left it in here with just a random GUID. It's not hopefully it's not somebody's, right? But I just generated a random GUID because I feel like ops folks and IT folks that have spent their entire career clicking next, this is almost a foreign language. And so what's the easiest way to learn foreign language? Well, copying and pasting helps. And so I have it here as a placeholder, but I know when I get ready to move this into the quick starts repo, I'm going to have to make it be more genericized, which is fine. I have no problem doing that. It's just one of those things where I feel like if I would have had this many years ago when I first figured out that Key Vault was the way to really be passing this sensitive information, it wouldn't have confused me the same way that it did. I'd be like, oh, that's how you do it. Okay, that makes sense. So this whole deployment takes into consideration using Key Vault, and then one of the big pieces here too is making sure that there's an Active Directory sites and services for Azure. That'll help with your authentication requests. That way you're not authenticating across the wire. You're authenticating, if it's in that subnet in Azure, it's authenticating to the DC in that subnet in Azure versus going across the wire. And, if users, it takes them a long time to log into things, they get a little cranky.
Yeah, and I think too, if you're building a new environment, especially if you're a customer who's just starting with cloud, or you've moved all of your other easier to move things, and now you're getting into the really gnarly, tough to migrate type things. This is a huge help for that, and even for customers who are standing up their infrastructure to connect to Azure AD, things like Azure AD Connect or whatever. The ability to do that, not necessarily on-prem, and do that in Azure, right? To do your synchronization from a Connect server up there, for example, or to have another set of PTA agents running in both in Azure and on-prem, right? Those are all, I think these are all like really, really good scenarios that make these templates so much more useful for folks who are actively in a migration right now, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not that these are bad templates, the ones about Active Directory, right? They're great if you're learning. It's just, I can't tell you how many customers saw that you had to build out, gosh, this is like a really big repo. Hang on, where is it? that you had to go in and you're building out a new domain, and they're like, well, that's not what we're going to do, right? Or this is so it's please stop using .local in your examples. I love some of. See, now that I'm in GitHub more, I love some of these comments, right? Some of the commit comments they make me smile. There's even, I think, like a Twitter handle out there that it's a GitHub API where anybody that's cursing in their commits or whatever, it immediately tweets it out. I think I shared that with you, JP, didn't I?
You did. In fact, I followed it. Yeah. It's called
I feel left out now. I feel left out.
Well, so in fairness, I found this out a number of years ago. Christos, I'll have to send it to you. It's hilarious. So if you're having a bad day and you're like, this won't work at all, you just go there and you're like, my day is better than this poor person's day. But yeah, so I think, kind of taking into consideration the idea that, you can go stand up something manually, right? That's never going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
But, the whole process of it taking weeks to months to build these servers, it's not even a thing anymore, right? It takes minutes to spin up a VM. It takes this, I ran this deployment quite a bit back right around the April timeframe, and end to end, it would take 20 to 30 minutes, and everything would be domain joined. That disk would be initialized. So let me go back to this here. Let's go back to the DSC script. So, I add the RSAT tools in. This is waiting for that disk to come on. This is adding the disk and kind of formatting the disk, right? I join the domain. The Active Directory domain services installation happens. You wait for everything to kind of come back online, post installing it and rebooting it. And this is where you start building out the actual domain, right? And so it's a cool reality, and the depends on is a really awesome feature. I feel like maybe we should have had this back when PowerShell first came about, but I mean, PowerShell has been a whole thing for me just to understand the whole notion of object-oriented programming, right? And I've done a little bit of C# now, and it makes so much more sense. But, back in, 2009, 2008, when everybody was like, oh, this is a thing, it's going to be great, here you go, learn PowerShell. And it was kind of like, well, okay, why am I doing it this way, though? It seemed a little bit different. And I think, over the last 10 plus years, I think, everybody's feeling much more confident and comfortable with it. But this takes it to that next level where you're actually specifying what exactly you want to have from a configuration perspective before you even go onto that server. So it's kind of, I joke a little bit here, it's a little bit of the unsung hero in these ARM templates, but it does come with some heartache, and that's why you have to have, your friends out there who know DSC better than you. And another shout out to Matt Canty. He's going to hate that I keep shouting out that he's the DSC guru.
Everybody's going to go find him.
I know.
We should put his Twitter handle in the chat.
We should.
Well, he's not here to defend himself.
Spreading the love.
No,
yeah, he also knows SharePoint, so now he's gonna really hate me.
Oh boy, oh yeah, that's not something you admit publicly, right?
that could be considered the kiss of death in certain circles. So,
hey, I know how it feels. I was a SharePoint refugee. I used to do.
That's right.
I used to do SharePoint development years and years ago, and I mean it was fine, but it's a lot of XML, which is probably what prepared me to go do B2C work, because that's a lot of XML too. But well, cool. So, I mean, if you're a developer too, like this has got a ton of implication for you for being able to use things like, you're standing up an IS server, right, for an older app or for an older app that you need to deliver. Right. And plus, too, with like Windows Virtual Desktop, I know like we've got some mutual friends who are doing a lot of work in Windows Virtual Desktop, and that requires domain controllers for the nodes to be joined to, and sort of using these two together, using WVD along with this template, for example. I mean, this cuts that time to WVD down even quicker, which is super important right now, of course, as everybody's, a lot of folks are working from home. So,
right,
super cool. So, well, thanks for coming. Thanks for telling us all about your stuff. I mean, this is awesome.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll make sure we get links out, and you'd written some blog posts sort of outlining a lot of the details around this and why it's important.
I did. So we broke it up into about 6 blog posts, because otherwise it would have been this like long book of blog posts, and nobody wants to read through that. So we broke it up into, I think it was 6 all in, and I can get you all those links plus a link to this repo. And like I said, it's on my list to get this into the quick starts, because I think you'd have a lot more buy-in from ops folks if what was on there matched exactly what they're up against. Because ops folks, I joke a lot about this too, ops folks want to take the path of least resistance, and if somebody's already done it, they're going to grab it and use it and take it, and maybe they'll tweak it a little bit, whereas a dev will go start from scratch, right JP? Right Christos? You guys will start from scratch, right?
Oh, sorry, you're breaking up.
How about this? You're more inclined to start from scratch than an ops folk.
Well, we know we have to start from scratch if we know it's an option if we have to, but yeah, I mean,
you know what? When it comes to ARM templates, I have my own kind of approach. I tend to deploy everything on Azure through the portal into a specific resource group, and then I go and extract that ARM template from that resource group. So I reverse engineer the ARM templates, because I don't know all the parameters and all the things I need to pass in. So sometimes doing it that way, it's like reverse engineering the ARM template, and then I tweak it and make it more modular, and I add key vault or what have you, but it's a lot easier rather than trying from scratch with a blank canvas and saying, drag and dropping things into the ARM template and trying to understand what it does. But I will definitely do copy pasting and look at the quick starts as well to see how things need to be done in the right way. So that's my approach, though. I don't think everybody's doing it.
Oh, no, I mean...
Oh, no, I like doing that. I did a lot of the exporting from the portal. I think once that became an option, a lot of folks gravitated towards that, because you could build everything that you wanted to build, and it would be more indicative of what you were actually trying to deploy, versus taking something that you had to like reverse engineer to even make it work and try and plug it in that way. So it's another great way to learn, right?
I mean, handwriting JSON is not a ton of fun, right? And especially
it's not.
John likes YAML. That's why he says.
Oh, don't even.
I think his ultimate favorite though is XML, right?
Hey, there are 2 reasons why I like XML over JSON and YAML, especially if I'm writing it by hand. Like if it's generated, whatever, I don't really care. But if I'm doing some hand-rolled artisan markup language, the XML has a schema, so I can get a much better idea of what's allowed and what's not. Not that JSON doesn't have schemas, but it can't leave comments and stuff, and
That's
it's just
true.
It's just kind of I don't know. Like I mean, I don't mind JSON as a format, but I don't like. If somebody said to me, "Hey, you should go write an ARM template from scratch," right? I'd be like, and all I would know how to do to start with is the open and close brackets, and typically what I do is go to the quick start templates, find something that's kind of close to what I need, go and export a previous deployment from the portal, and then look at both of them and say, I wonder what this does, and just sort of munge something together that turns into something I want.
Oh, totally.
Or I phone a friend and I'm like, hey, what are you doing?
It's been a while. Let's catch up and do some JSON together.
I think, and I think that's the thing that's kind of changing IT right now, right? Like, we went for so many years being very siloed, and now we're kind of sitting somewhere in the middle, you know? And if you would have told me 10 years ago I'd be at Microsoft, people would be trusting the cloud, and I'd be, hitting REST APIs like a dev, I probably would have called BS and said, no, I don't know, I won't. What are you talking about? Who's ever going to trust the cloud? And now I'm like, no, there's a reason to trust the cloud. But it does come with a learning curve, and it's a matter of finding those folks that, are good at explaining things. So I know I've come to JP quite a bit. Matt, hi Matt. There's another shout out to Matt. And Matt and I were talking about doing something where we were going to run through, like, how do you teach an infrastructure person how to code, because he's really good at taking it down to, like, if I was a six-year-old, I could probably learn how to code if I had Matt as my teacher, right? Those people are invaluable, and the problem is they are so invaluable that they're hard to find time with. So I was like, well, at some point we should, like, come up with something where we give back to the community, because there's a lot of ops folks out there that are struggling. You say ARM templates, they're like totally on board. How do I do it? Right? And that's the hard part, is how do I take myself from doing that next deployment, right click, do some configurations, apply okay, to all software defined. And there's not a lot of in-betweens, right? It's hard to jump from that point. And so I'm a huge believer in infrastructure as code, and I've walked folks through a lot of different types of scenarios, and that's why I keep landing on Visual Studio, because there's a lot of things you can do. Like, if I wanted to add a new resource in here, let's see, hang on, I think I can do it. Right? No, that's right. I have to go into the deployment script itself, and then I can add a new resource, right? So that's kind of cool. Now, granted, the APIs it leans on are a little bit older, but I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, this starts to get people to calm down. Like, oh, it's as simple as I just right-click and add a new resource? Like, so long as your format here has parameters and a variables and a resource, you can do that, which is kind of cool. So there's a lot of ways to work, and there's also determined there's no dumb questions when it comes to the world of trying to figure all this out so fast. And it's, do you want to put Humpty Dumpty back together again? Do you want to keep it as is? How can we make this better than what we had previously? And this is one of the ways that I've landed on, to get folks comfortable with the fact that you don't have to go deploy two, domain controllers and manually configure everything once it's up and live and functional. You could lean on a more automated deployment and then free up your time to, tend to fires if things are burning up in your on-premises world, or learning on a new technique, right?
Well, it's a culture shift, right? Like it takes a lot of buy-in from the folks who are going to be doing the work, from the people who are managing the work and scheduling the work, and from everyone inside of a management chain, and everybody in sort of in an IT group as a whole has to at least consider, this is what we're going to start. We're going to start moving this way. You can't do it overnight, but there's not this isn't you flip the switch one day and suddenly everybody's on board. I mean, it's like that with developers with cloud too, right? Like, I mean, and the difference between a developer and an ops person is getting way more sort of blurry anyway, right? Because devs are writing code to build their apps, and then they're also writing deployment code to get it out there. And ops folks are writing tons of code for automating their deployments and for automating their environments and logging and stuffing things to SIM tools and everything else. Like, there's a ton of just the volume of code that people are writing. And sure, they might be sort of different in terms of the net result of each one of them, but at the end of the day, a lot of people are writing code, and that cultural shift is hard, especially for big orgs. It can be hard for them to move from we have servers as pets to we have cattle, and Nobody touches deployments, nobody touches production. If production has a problem, we stuff it in a t-shirt cannon, boot it out of here, and go create some new servers, right? And that's easy when you have things like this to create an entire environment from scratch without a human being sitting there. But if you have fed and watered this DC for 20 years, and it's time to move it up into the cloud, that's going to be a much more difficult. It's going to make it much more difficult. If you're not sort of mentally prepared for the difference between, owning servers individually and owning farms of servers, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So, well, cool. Well, thank you so much for for coming on, Shannon. Super exciting stuff, and we will share the links to your blog posts that explain this in excruciating detail. And we've got some links to the repos and things already in the chat. We'll make sure to get the rest of them out. For everybody else, we will be back on Tuesday morning. That's Tuesday the
21st.
The 21st of July, also known as March 384th. We'll be back at 10 a.m.
Is that how you guys are tracking time?
I mean, that's what it feels like. I've been in my, with the exception of this past month where we've been on vacation. I was in my house for 14 weeks with 3 kids and my wife. It's like, oh my god, I gotta get out of here. But
did you read? I think you should have reached sainthood by that point, right? Did you?
No, my wife has, not me. She's still way ahead of me. I get, as she says, I get to go to work every day. So we'll be back on Tuesday morning at 10 Eastern. We're going to be working on building a token cache for MSAL that uses table storage that is per user in particular, which can be a little bit trickier than I originally believed when I embarked on that journey. So we're going to jump on that. Send us your questions on Twitter, on Twitch. Send us your questions. Send us your comments, concerns, personal attacks, whatever you'd like, and we will see everybody on Tuesday morning. Have a great weekend.
Have a lovely day, everyone.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.